This is TWiT.
How's it going, Ian?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. Yourself?
Doing okay. Slightly, I don't know, should I be worried about Petya? I'm not quite sure that I've done what needed to happen in order to let Petya into my life. But give us a quick rundown on how all of this began. Okay,
well, based on the best experience we've got, on the best knowledge that we've got at the moment, then the whole episode seems to have stemmed from a hacking attack on a Ukrainian financial services company called WeDoc. Now, hackers unknown managed to get in there and use their software update facility to push out what looks at first sight like a piece of ransomware to a very large number of people indeed. This then used network shares to spread around internally within companies' computer networks, but it doesn't at this stage appear as though there was an external method of propagation. So there was no scanning of open ports on the general internet. It's just if you got this on your network, it then tried to spam itself out to every other computer on the network. Now, as I say, it looks like ransomware, but at the same time, it differs in certain key areas, which leads one to suspect that the actual purpose of this wasn't to collect money, it was to cause mayhem. And my goodness, didn't it do that well.
Yeah, well, it seems more and more mayhem. It's almost a daily occurrence at this point. Mayhem is served up like on a plate daily. So you say, obviously, it began in large part in the Ukraine, and it has spread out beyond. But do we actually know how it is spreading? If that's not part of its game plan, it doesn't spread by itself. So does that mean someone is implanting it specifically, or someone's clicking on the wrong link? How's that happening?
Well, okay, the Ukrainian police are saying that a small number of phishing emails have been found, but it's suspected those were used to actually get into the financial services company itself. What you're seeing with, Maersk Shipping, who controls 16% of the world's container fleet, they got it and went down. WPP, the world's largest agency, everyone there is working from home at the moment while they repair their networks. DLA Piper has got it, and although FedEx haven't confirmed it yet, it's strongly suspected that TNT Express has got the same thing, which is why they're warning customers that delays are getting in. Now, in some cases, Maersk were actually advertising for somebody who is familiar with this bit of software, so it's reasonable to assume they were using it. What we suspect is happening with other offices that have been hit by this around the world is that they had sub-offices within the Ukraine, and they configure their networks in such a way that it couldn't stop the malware from moving sideways into other office networks around the world. So it doesn't appear as though this is being spammed out via email attachments. There's nothing in the malware itself which is pushing it out to people who it hasn't already infected outside of a corporate network. So at this point, it's really down to bad luck and bad network management if you've actually got it.
So if it's not being pushed out through these emails, and these phishing emails, then how is it getting on the systems in the first place? And for the average network, these are big corporations that you would think would have some pretty good precautions in place against stuff like this. How are they getting infiltrated this easily? You just mentioned at least 2 giant corporations, and at least a third that I'm not really familiar with, but sounds a little bit smaller. But do they not have the proper precautions in place?
Well, not really. What they did was, and Microsoft warned about this sort of attack in May. What they actually did was get into the financial services company itself, get access to the server that it uses to issue software updates, and then use that to spam out the malware to everyone that was using that bit of software and had got updates to be set up to be loaded and run automatically, which, from the looks of it, was the vast majority of their user base. So they were subverting the trusted software management systems within the company rather than attacking each individual company separately.
Wow. That's pretty smart. And I saw that Microsoft today, they had a blog post about how they're going to be incorporating more artificial intelligence and machine learning into kind of stopping these types of attacks. Do you think that would help in this instance? And how would that work exactly? If they see a bunch of people, already like, Gmail and things, they do some level of protection for, hey, this looks like a phishing email. Could that stop something like this or no?
Well, okay, it depends on whether you believe the marketing stuff. There has been a lot of great work done on security software heuristics, which means looking for patterns of behavior and the way that certain software works and blocking that because it's most likely to be malware. In this particular case, it's possible they could have caught on to it, but probably too late. You see, this was a very sophisticated bit of code. Once it actually got onto the machine, it waited for a random period between 10 and 60 minutes after it sort of infected that machine before actually firing up the ransomware and starting to encrypt the PCs. Plus, it also encrypted on two levels. First, it went into the master boot sector and put its own code on there so that it had complete control of the PC before security software had a chance to even boot up. And then it also started encrypting individual files, although its choices of files to encrypt was rather curious, to say the least.
That's interesting. Now, there are some who are saying, and I think you kind of alluded to this, that ransomware was never, it doesn't appear to be the end game here, that possibly, you know, as some were saying, well, the ransomware aspect of this was used to throw off the press to kind of formulate the press message and send them on a trail while it's actually approaching something else. Is there any hard evidence that points to like involvement from a nation state from that perspective, that this is actually something more insidious than just ransomware?
Well, the Ukrainians are saying that yes, it was a nation-state attack, and I have to say, having gone through the evidence and spent most of yesterday sort of writing an analysis piece on this, that was my conclusion too, because there's no hard evidence specifically, but there's a lot of things about this which don't make no sense at all. For example, the primary purpose of ransomware is to make money for the criminals. Right. Now, what they did. Well, I mean, typically when you get hit by ransomware, you get an individual Bitcoin wallet generated for each infection. You put your money into that, and then they'll send you instructions on how to decrypt your machine. With this, what they did was say, right, type a very long string of random, your wallet chain into an email and send it to this specific email address, and displayed that on the ransom scheme. Now, anyone with half a brain knows that the minute this goes big and people actually start getting warnings about this, they go onto the email provider to find out what's going on, and the email provider shuts down that email. So
which is what happened here, right?
Yeah, exactly. They shut it down within 3 hours. The most money, I think they got about $10,000 for it, which if you're a criminal mastermind running that, you're about to get a pair of concrete boots and thrown into the nearest river. So that instantly made me suspicious. Now, there's a couple of other things as well. Firstly, this attack occurred on the day before Constitution Day, which is the Ukrainian national holiday. Now, generally, if you're a criminal, you try and do your attacks at the weekends or at national holidays. We saw this with the attack on the SWIFT financial system. Instead, they did it the day before, which seems to be guaranteed to make maximum disruption for the maximum number of people. And then thirdly, the choice of files that was encrypted was really weird. A lot of image files didn't get encrypted using with this particular piece of malware. Now, usually those are amongst the first things to get encrypted because people care about baby photos and family photos and that sort of thing, makes them more likely to pay. So with the original Petya ransomware, it encrypted hundreds of file formats. This only encrypted 65, and they were primarily aimed at developers and network tools and applications that developers and network administrators would be using. So it's a very odd mix of things to come through. So the lack of the ability to get money out of this, the choices of things that it was encrypted, and the timing of the attack, I personally think do point towards state-sponsored cyber war.
What's the deal with this random read-only file? If you had this on your computer, this Windows perfc.dat in the Windows directory, what was up with that? If you had that, it would stop this whole thing from happening. Why was that instituted, and why was that written into the code? And what would that do? Why would that stop it?
Basically, that would stop the encryption process by denying the attackers the ability to encrypt the files on the PC. But crucially, it wouldn't stop it from spreading throughout the network. So that will defend individual PCs, but it won't stop the malware itself from spreading. And this was only found, 8 to 10 hours after the initial infection reports came in, and security researchers had really had time to go through the code. Now, it's looking at this stage as though it was a mistake by the malware authors themselves. I mean, writing really good impenetrable ransomware is tough, and we've seen many cases in the past where after a day or a couple of days, people have gone through the code and found a way to defeat the encryption process. In this case, the encryption process was really tight. At the moment, if your files are encrypted with this piece of ransomware, you're toast. You are never getting those files back. You're just going to have to wipe the entire system and reload from backups. But it does appear that they did make a certain, there were ways in which this could be stopped if you had the access to the full code. Now, unfortunately, this particular sort of safeguard didn't come to light until the vast majority of infections had come round. So it's not going to be a massive amount of use, but if you're really worried about it, it might be worth considering doing.
And then, I mean, WannaCry was a really big deal. At some point, you stopped hearing about it because it stopped kind of making the headlines because it slowed down significantly. Thankfully, I feel like are we still ramping up on this one, or have things kind of started to settle down a little bit?
No, I mean, things have tailed off dramatically. After the initial burst of infections, there was a very high initial burst, much higher than you'd usually see. I mean, typically infections will sort of go up slowly, reach critical mass, and then shoot up. Yeah. This went right up top from the front and then tailed away very quickly, which again points to the software update mechanism of propagation. So, but again, which is not a usual way to spread malware. I mean, it's been used by hackers in the past to target individual companies and their customers. I think the example Microsoft used was it was a finance house that dealt with stock trading, which is obviously very valuable if you can hack into those systems and start diverting funds. But for a financial services software company going after, that's in general use by, I mean, we saw supermarkets who couldn't do till checkout because of this ransomware. Mm-hmm. The Chernobyl nuclear power station automatic radiation monitoring systems were hacked.
Wow.
Gas and steel producers were hacked. This was not targeted in any way, shape, or form that we can see. It was simply using a vector to cause maximum damage within the application that was subverted.
Yeah.
How much of this particular attack was a old software issue, or we hear a lot of these things happen because you're running older versions of software or things that weren't patched properly. We're moving ahead, with Windows 10 and all these new programs and applications, and so many of us are living a majority of our lives online using consumer applications. I mean, we're primarily talking about businesses here, but for the average person, I mean, are we moving more secure? Like, will in 5 years will an attack like this be worse, or will things get better?
Okay, well, I mean, typically, yes, you're right. These sort of attacks work very well because people don't patch. And this particular piece of malware did use two already patched vulnerabilities to spread. The SMB flaw that was used by WannaCry and a flaw in Microsoft Office, which would allow privilege escalation. And that was patched back in March, I believe. But at the same time, it also spread via things like WMI, which is all down to how your the only way to block that was if your network administrator had set up the network in a particular way. So that itself wasn't directly related to patching. Now, the security software people got onto this fairly quickly. When it was first detected, very, very few security software pieces actually blocked it. By the end of yesterday, every major security vendor had got a signature file for this and was blocking it at source. So, I mean, they were quick-ish to react in terms of having it done within the day. But obviously, with the speed that data spreads through networks, that's not quite quick enough.
And if you're affected, that's not quick at all.
No. If you're affected, then the only thing you could do, and if there are still infections going on, we haven't heard of any today, but the only thing that you could do if you're infected, you would know immediately if you're infected, because once it activates, it reboots the PC and you get that blue check disk screen that pretty much every Windows user has seen at one time or another. And when it's going through the check disk 1%, 2%, 3%, it wasn't actually checking the disk. It was 1 or 2 or 3% of all files encrypted. So the only thing you could do there, yank out the plug, take out the battery on your laptop and kill it stone dead, and then use live CD or a USB boot to actually retrieve your files before that hadn't been encrypted in the process. So, I mean, once it's on your system, if you didn't get your laptop off fast enough, then that's it, game over.
Dang.
Can I ask one more question? Do we have time?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just curious, as if I'm a startup and I'm doing a lot of stuff kind of in the cloud, with these, I saw the Windows S of the world, the Chromebooks of the world. Does that sort of make my system safer because I'm doing these things that are not, these old school servers that I have? I mean, obviously you have to have some of those But I mean, for employees and stuff like that are moving to these web-based systems, is that more secure, or are we just going to see more exploits of the web-based systems in the future?
Oh, we're definitely going to see those, and certainly with Windows 10s, for example, that's been. I was at the launch event in New York. They were saying, "Oh, it's hacker." They obviously, well, they weren't going to say it's hacker-proof because that would be an insane thing to say. But they said it was as secure as could be made, and sure enough, security researchers managed to crack it relatively quickly. With Chrome OS, you are safer simply because very few hackers are targeting Chrome OS at the moment. Since its footprint in the business community is relatively small. It's huge in education, and I think we're going to see some problems there later. I mean, this only affected Windows PC, and typically these hacking attacks target Windows PC because you want to go for 80% of the operating systems in the world, not 20%, if you're looking to cause maximum mayhem or get maximum financial gain. So the smaller, less used operating systems get hit less. But coming to your argument on the cloud, I think cloud is safer on one level. Yes, if your computer is completely pwned, they'll have all your passwords and they can access your cloud accounts anyway. But there's a big caveat to that. The companies running these cloud data centers is very good on security by and large. But as more and more of our data gets stored and run up there, these are going to become targets for hackers as well. And there hasn't yet been a software system built or a hardware configuration run which can't be cracked at some level. So yes, they provide a little more security, a little better security, but things will change. This is a constantly evolving situation. It's what evolutionary scientists call a Red Queen situation, where one side runs faster, the other side runs faster to catch up, and it's a constant race going forward.
Wow. Yeah, it's a moving target, always, especially, I mean, yeah, right, with the cloud becoming more and more important and more ubiquitous across all of these, enterprises, it's going to be more of a target. So
oh, yeah,
and I mean, if they down on that.
If they do actually manage to subvert a cloud data centers of, say, Amazon or Google or Microsoft, the knock-on effects are going to be huge. And it's really going to cause the industry to sit down and think, right, we've got to do a fundamental rethink on this. And hopefully they can do it before disaster strikes.
Yeah, right.
I just worry about when I log on to Google Photos, seeing all my photos sort of disappear like a Hollywood movie, like as they all get. Yeah. That's my biggest fear. You don't want to lose those kid photos. And I think, like you said, yeah, as everyone starts to rely on the cloud for their data, it's like almost like a bigger issue of, is Dropbox now the target? Is Google now? Yeah, it's crazy, but okay.
Well, and
interesting. Great insights.
In that regard, then you have to, if you're worried about your photos disappearing like you guys just did. No, come back.
There we go.
I'm blind.
You have to do your Google takeout. Do the takeout now. And do it on a regular basis and make sure you have a backup to your backup to your backup. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And I know people say that, but you have to actually do it.
You have to actually do it, right?
You have to do it.
But I mean, the advice for defeating this or any other ransomware hasn't changed in the last 48 hours. You back up regularly, you back up completely, you shut down any ports or any application processes that you don't need, and you patch constantly. You make sure you're constantly up to date. Yeah. Now, if you've got backups, ransomware can't hurt you. And yes, it's a pain in the fundament to actually back up every week, but it's something that people really should be building into their schedule. Just automatically do it. Set up a disk on your computer. You can set up scripts to make it happen automatically, but just back up constantly, because otherwise, if you do get caught out, you lose the lot.